Hey, hello, what's up everyone? In this video, I'm going to teach you about what happens when Jupiter is sitting in the 8th house of D9 chart or navamsa chart in Vedic astrology. So before beginning, if you guys not subscribed to my channel, please subscribe to my channel, hit the bell icon and click the like button. And if you guys have any doubt after watching this video, please do mention it in my below comment section, okay? And yes, please like and follow my Facebook community page, Parikshith Astrology also. So let's begin. So mainly, what do you mean by navamsa chart or the D9 chart? See, navamsa chart or the D9 chart is the second most important chart after your birth chart. It gets activated after your second half of your life or after 33 years or 36 years of your age. It is mainly seen for your strengthness of your planet. It is also seen for your married life. It is also seen for your relationship between you and your spouse and also your marital life. Now, coming to the strengthness of your planet. Now, let's say, for example, if any planet is debilitated in your birth chart. Now, let's say, for example, if Sun is debilitated in your birth chart and that planet Sun has been exalted in your navamsa chart or the D9 chart, that shows that that planet Sun has gained extra strength or extra power. Now, coming to the married life. See, every individual divisional chart, including the main birth chart, has its own Karaka planet or the significator planet, right? Now, suppose in your birth chart or the D1 chart, Sun is the Karaka planet or the significator planet, right? Likewise, in your Navamsa chart or the D9 chart, Venus is the Karaka planet or the significator planet. So, Venus should be placed in an exalted sign, Multrikon sign, own sign, or in a friendly sign. That shows that your married life will be very good. Now, coming to the 8th house of your D9 chart or Navamsa chart. Now, what does 8th house of your D9 chart or Navamsa chart represent? See, 8th house of your D9 chart or Navamsa chart represents your joint assets. It also represents the longevity of your married life. It also represents your in-laws, that is the spouse family. So these are all the things can be seen from the 8th house of the D9 chart or Navamsa chart. Now what happens when Jupiter is sitting in the 8th house of the D9 chart or Navamsa chart? Now what does planet Jupiter represent? See, planet Jupiter represents your knowledge, especially your divine knowledge or spiritual knowledge. It also represents your guru or teachers. It also represents your education. It also represents your children. So when Jupiter is sitting in the 8th house of your D9 chart or Navamsa chart, that shows that after your married life, you will get a spouse who might be very, it shows that your spouse family might be very educated. It also shows that they will have a lot of wealth if Jupiter is placed very well without any affliction. It also shows that your spouse family can be very religious also. Now, it also shows that your mother-in-law might be very religious, especially. It also shows that any one of your spouse family member can be working in banking sector or can be working as a teacher because Jupiter represents guru or teacher. Now, it also shows that these people will receive a lot of joint assets from spouse family also. Now, what happens when Jupiter is conjuncted with different planets, like benefic planets and malefic planets? Now, what happens when Jupiter is conjuncted with benefic planets like Moon, Venus and Mercury? Now coming to the planet Moon. Now what happens when Jupiter is conjuncted with planet Moon? Now what does planet Moon represents? It represents your mother. It signifies happiness. It represents your mind. It represents your emotion. So when Moon and Jupiter are sitting in the 8th house of your D9 chart or Navamsa chart, it also shows that your mother's health might get a bit affected. It also shows that you might try to hide your emotions from your in-law, or your in-laws might be very emotional. It also shows that you might try to hide your emotions in the marriage. It also shows that you will get a lot of support from your in-laws and you'll get a lot of happiness from your in-laws also. Now what happens when Jupiter is conjuncted with planet Venus? Now what does Venus represents? Venus signifies your spouse. Venus signifies happiness from the marriage. Venus signifies a luxurious life. So when Venus and Jupiter are sitting in the 8th house, that shows that it's a very great married life, and it also shows that it's a great blessings from your spouse family and from the spouse also. It also represents you will receive a lot of wealth from your spouse family side and all. Now what happens when Jupiter is sitting with Mercury? Now what does Mercury represents? Mercury represents your intelligence, your communication, business minded and all. So when Jupiter and Mercury are sitting in the 8th house, that shows that you and your spouse can open up a business after the married life, or your spouse family can be having some business. It also shows that you'll have great communication with you and your spouse family, and it also shows that in the married life or during the married life, you might try to hide your communication. So these are all things can be seen when Jupiter and Mercury are sitting in the 8th house. What happens when Jupiter is sitting with the malefic planets like Sun, Mars, Rahu, Ketu, and Saturn. Now coming to the planet Sun. What happens when Jupiter is sitting with planet Sun? Now what does Sun represent? Sun represents king, government, father. Sun represents dominative nature. Sun represents ego. So when Sun and Jupiter are sitting in the 8th house, it shows that you will receive a lot of money from your in-laws family. It also shows that your spouse family can be having ego problem. It also shows that they might be having dominative nature and all. So these are all things can be seen when Jupiter and Sun are sitting in the 8th house of the D9 chart or navamsa chart. Now what happens when Jupiter is sitting with planet Mars? Now what does Mars represent? Mars represents courage, brave. Mars represents aggressive nature of a person. So when Jupiter and Mars are sitting in the 8th house, that shows that your spouse family member can be very aggressive or short tempered and all. Now what happens when Jupiter is sitting with the planet Saturn? Now what does Saturn represent? Saturn represents the longevity of a person. It also represents mature type of people. It also represents principle and discipline. It also represents hard working. It also represents lazy when afflicted. So when Jupiter and Saturn are sitting in the 8th house, that shows that your spouse family can be very hardworking, having their own principle and having their own discipline nature. It also shows that your spouse family can be very strict also. Now what happens when Jupiter is with Rahu? Now what does Rahu represents? Rahu represents cheating, Maya. It represents illusion. When Jupiter and Rahu are sitting in the 8th house of the D9 chart or navamsa chart, that shows that you will get an in-law who might cheat to you. It also shows that you might have an extramarital affair after the married life, or your spouse might be having extramarital affair after the married life also. Now you need to check the dispositor of the Rahu. Now if the dispositor of the Rahu is placed very well, then that shows that everything will be fine. But you need to check the dasha also, which dasha you are running particularly. Now what happens when Jupiter and Ketu are sitting in the 8th house of D9 chart or navamsa chart? Now what does planet Ketu represent? See, Ketu represents separation, detachment, divorce. Ketu also represents isolation. So when Jupiter and Ketu are sitting in the 8th house of the D9 chart or navamsa chart, that shows that you might separate yourself from your spouse family member or from your in-laws. It also shows that you may not be interested to talk with your in-laws and all, share things and all. So these are all the things can be seen when Jupiter and Ketu are sitting in the 8th house of D9 chart or navamsa chart. So this was my analysis of what happens when Jupiter is sitting in the 8th house of D9 chart or navamsa chart. So this is it for today, guys. If you are new to my channel, please subscribe below, or else I will see in the next video. So if you want any consultancy, please to contact to my given below WhatsApp number, or else you can even mail me also. So until and unless, thank you, bye bye, love you, take care.